$250,000. My HOA just slapped me with the most ridiculous fine in neighborhood history for violations on my own property. Are you absolutely kidding me right now? I've been living here for 30 years, minding my own business, and suddenly these people are telling me I'm trespassing on community land. These million-dollar mansion owners with their perfect lawns and fancy cars think they can intimidate a 71-year-old man into giving up everything he owns. The biggest mistake of their lives, what I discovered when I decided to fight back, is going to completely blow your mind and destroy their perfect little bubble forever. Trust me when I say you have never seen revenge, this absolutely satisfying. Drop a comment below. Has your HOA ever tried to pull something this outrageous on you? That Tuesday morning started like any other. I was out back checking on my chickens when I heard the mail truck rumble down our quiet street. Nothing unusual there, except when I walked to the mailbox, there was this thick certified letter waiting for me. The return address said Sunset Hills Homeowners Association, in fancy gold lettering that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. My gut told me this wasn't going to be good news, but I had no idea just how deep this rabbit hole would go. The envelope was heavy professional looking, the kind that screams expensive lawyers from a mile away. I stood there in my driveway looking at this thing like it might bite me when Betty Harris from across the street waved and called out, "Morning mail, bringing good news, Walter." If only she knew. Inside that envelope was a violation notice that made my blood pressure spike faster than a jackrabbit in July. They were fining me $250,000 for 3 major violations: illegal fence placement beyond property line, unauthorized structures in community setback area, and encroachment on designated green space. Now, I've been around long enough to smell bullshit from 3 counties away, and this was grade A premium manure. My fence had been in the exact same spot for 30 years, right where my father built it, back when this whole area was nothing but farmland and dreams. The unauthorized structures they were talking about: my tool shed chicken coop and the little gazebo my late wife Jane loved to sit in every evening. As for encroachment on designated green space, that was my vegetable garden, where I'd been growing tomatoes since before most of these mansion owners knew what real dirt looked like. But here's where it gets interesting, and trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this part. Within 2 hours of my opening that letter, Sophia Blackstone herself came marching across my yard like she owned the place. And I mean literally marching. This woman was wearing designer heels that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check, clicking across my gravel driveway with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in her entire privileged life. She had 2 other HOA board members trailing behind her like royal attendants, and she was carrying this official-looking clipboard like it was some kind of magic wand that could make my property disappear. The look on her face, pure disdain, like she was examining something nasty she'd scraped off her shoe. "Mr. Harrison," she announced without so much as a good morning, "I'm here to document these violations personally before we proceed with legal action." She started walking around my modest little property, pointing at my fence, my garden shed, my chicken coop, declaring everything a violation of community standards and encroachment on HOA-maintained areas. I'm standing there watching this performance, feeling my temper rise like steam from a tea kettle. This woman was telling me that structures that had been on my property since before she probably even lived in this state were somehow illegal. When I pulled out my original property papers from 1973 to show her where my boundaries actually were, she dismissed them with a wave of her manicured hand. "Those old papers are irrelevant," she said with the kind of authority that comes from never having to back up your words with facts. "We have modern surveys showing community boundaries. You're clearly trespassing on a HOA property." And that's when Betty came over, bless her heart, and confirmed she remembered my fence being in that exact same spot for the 25 years she'd lived across the street. But Sophia just smiled that cold smile and said we were both confused about the updated property lines. She threatened legal action property liens and forced sale if I didn't comply within 30 days. Now, most folks my age might have been intimidated by all that legal talk and expensive suits, but I didn't spend 45 years in construction without learning how to spot a con artist. Something about this whole situation was setting off every alarm bell in my professional instincts, especially when I noticed the violation notice referenced a survey from 2010, 5 years after these mansions were built. Why would you need a new survey after the houses were already up? As a retired surveyor, I knew that the $250,000 fine required immediate legal attention, So I called my old friend Jim Patterson, who'd handled property law for 30 years. He took one look at those violation papers and whistled low. "Walter," he said, "you need to get an independent survey done yesterday. Something about this smells fishier than low tide." He recommended getting a comprehensive boundary survey to prove my property lines were exactly where I claimed they were. That evening, I went out to my garage and dusted off equipment I hadn't touched since retirement. GPS units, measuring tools, metal stakes, all the professional gear that had been my livelihood for nearly half a century. If these people wanted to play games with property boundaries, they'd pick the wrong old man to mess with. I spent that first evening doing some preliminary measurements with my handheld GPS unit, and what I found made my hands shake with something between excitement and pure rage. My fence wasn't just in the right place, it was exactly where the original property corners should be down to the inch. Using my old metal detector, I started finding the original survey stakes, buried under all that fancy landscaping around the mansion boundaries. But here's what really got my attention. Those buried stakes suggested my property extended way beyond where my current fence line sat. Way beyond. And if that was true, then some very expensive structures might be sitting on land that belonged to me. I looked across at Sophia's mansion, with its infinity pool and tennis court, then at the other 4 palatial houses surrounding my modest little home, and started wondering if maybe I wasn't the one doing the trespassing after all. Walter discovers he's not fighting simple HOA harassment. He's about to uncover something that will turn his quiet retirement into the property battle of the century. But what Jake Miller finds buried under those perfectly manicured mansion gardens will shock everyone who thinks they know where the real property lines are. The next morning, I called Jake Miller, the best independent surveyor in 3 counties, and explained my situation. Jake's been in the business almost as long as I, and when I told him about those buried survey stakes and the suspicious timing of that 2010 survey, he got quiet for a long minute. "Walter," he finally said, "this sounds like the kind of mess that makes lawyers rich and homeowners poor. But if you're right about those boundaries, we're talking about something a lot bigger than fence disputes." He agreed to do a comprehensive 3-week survey of my entire 8 acres, using every piece of modern technology available. GPS base stations, laser measuring equipment, ground-penetrating radar, the whole 9 yards. If someone was trying to steal my land through legal paperwork, we were going to prove it with technology that doesn't lie. Week 1 was like watching a master craftsman at work. Jake set up his equipment with the precision of a brain surgeon, using my original 1970s ownership papers as the baseline for everything. We started with the property corners, comparing the recorded legal descriptions with GPS satellite positioning that's accurate to within inches. Every day brought new evidence that made my suspicions look less crazy and more like cold, hard fact. The GPS readings showed my property extended 50 to 75 feet beyond my current fence line in multiple directions, which meant I'd been living on just a fraction of the land I actually owned. But more importantly, it meant those fancy mansions might be sitting on property that belonged to me, not them. By week 2, Jake's metal detector was finding original iron survey stakes, buried 2 to 3 feet underground, hidden by decades of landscaping that had been designed to make people forget where the real boundaries were. I watched Sophia pacing around in her backyard, making phone calls and staring at us through her kitchen window, like we were planning to steal her silverware. She even came over one afternoon trying to sweet-talk Jake about his credentials and whether he was properly licensed for this kind of work. Jake just smiled and handed her his business card, pointing out the state surveyor seal and 20 years of professional experience. Her face went white when she realized she wasn't dealing with some hack with a measuring tape. The systematic revelation of what we were uncovering hit me like a freight train loaded with karma. Sophia's $300,000 infinity pool and tennis court, sitting entirely on my property, not even close to her actual boundary line. That 4-car garage Nathan Cross was so proud of with the circular driveway that looked like something from a car show built completely on my land. Elena Foster's $500,000 master bedroom wing with the bathroom bigger than my kitchen and that walk-in closet that could house a small family, every square inch of it was on property that legally belonged to me. Jackson Murphy's outdoor kitchen setup that he used for those fancy dinner parties, complete with the pizza oven and entertainment area, my land. And Bethany Wells' manicured front lawn with the fountain and gazebo that looked like something from a magazine, all of it was on property I'd inherited from my father 50 years ago. Jake kept shaking his head as we documented each encroachment with GPS precision and professional photography. "Walter," he said after measuring Sophia's pool area. In 20 years of surveying, I've never seen systematic trespassing this massive across multiple properties. This isn't accidental. Somebody knew exactly what they were doing when these houses went up. The scope of what we discovered was staggering. Over $2 million worth of structures, landscaping, and improvements built on my 8 acres without my knowledge or permission. Every single mansion had expensive additions that crossed my actual property lines, some by significant distances. The most damning evidence came when Jake investigated that 2010 survey the HOA had referenced in their violation notice. It took some digging, but he tracked down the company that supposedly filed it, except the company had gone out of business in 2008, 2 years before the survey was allegedly conducted. The signatures on the document, they didn't match any licensed surveyors in the state database. The coordinates completely fabricated, designed to make it look like my property was much smaller than it actually was. Someone had created an entirely fake survey to justify stealing my land, and they'd been getting away with it for over a decade. Betty Harris turned out to be an invaluable witness to this whole scheme. She remembered the construction phase vividly, crews moving my original fence markers during the building process, telling neighbors they were updating boundary lines for the new development. She'd assumed it was all legal and above board because, well, who questions official-looking construction crews with permits and professional equipment? But now, seeing Jake's measurements and comparing them to her memories of where things used to be, the pieces were falling into place. My father's carefully placed boundary markers had been deliberately moved and buried to hide the fact that these wealthy homeowners were building their dream houses on someone else's land. The final week of surveying felt like Christmas morning every day, except instead of presents under the tree, we were unwrapping evidence that would change 5 families' lives forever. Jake completed his 40-page professional report with legal descriptions, coordinate systems, photographic evidence, and GPS verification using multiple satellite confirmations. The conclusion was undeniable. I legally owned portions of all 5 luxury mansions based on recorded property deeds that predated their construction by decades. Modern GPS technology was simply confirming what my father had known when he bought this land. Property lines don't change just because rich people want them to. Sophia's panic was becoming more obvious by the day. She hired her own attorney, threatened lawsuits against Jake's surveying company, demanded second opinions from other professionals, and started making noise about elderly people with failing memories and vindictive intentions. But Jake's equipment doesn't have opinions or grudges. It just measures truth. And the truth was about to make 5 very wealthy neighbors face the most expensive mistake of their lives. As I looked at that comprehensive survey report with its GPS coordinates and legal descriptions and photographic proof, I realized this quiet retirement was about to become anything but quiet. When Jake Miller finishes his final measurements and shows Walter the complete survey results, the old man's face goes pale. What they've discovered about who actually owns what isn't just shocking. It's about to make 5 very wealthy neighbors face the most expensive mistake of their lives. Echo Stories wants to know, are you watching this unfold from your own property? Drop a comment and let us know where you're following this wild ride. With Jake's 40-page survey report in my hands, I felt like I was holding a stick of dynamite with a very short fuse. The GPS coordinates, legal descriptions, and photographic evidence painted a picture so clear that even a blind man could see what had happened here. But I'm old enough to know that being right and proving you're right in a way that matters are 2 completely different things. I needed a lawyer who specialized in property disputes, and I needed one fast. Jim Patterson recommended his colleague Jane Mitchell, a sharp-tongued property attorney who had spent 20 years making developers wish they'd chosen different careers. Jane took one look at Jake's survey report and let out a whistle that could have called my chickens home from 3 counties over. "Walter," she said, leaning back in her leather chair, "this is either the biggest property rights case I've seen in 2 decades or the most elaborate fraud attempt in state history. But based on these GPS measurements and your original deeds, I'd bet my law degree that you own exactly what these surveys say you own." She explained that recorded property deeds are like constitutional law in the real estate world. They supersede HOA bylaws, neighborhood agreements, and even city zoning if the paperwork is older and properly filed. My 1973 deed wasn't just a piece of paper. It was legal gospel that had been gathering dust while millionaires built swimming pools on my land. The historical research Jane conducted painted an even more damning picture of what had happened during the construction boom 15 years ago. Those building permits for the mansions had been approved using boundary information that didn't match the county recorder's office records. Someone in the development company had submitted falsified property surveys to get approval for construction that extended well beyond the actual lot lines. The county recorder confirmed that my original deed was authentic, properly recorded, and had never been legally modified or challenged. Meanwhile, that mysterious 2010 survey that started this whole mess, complete fabrication filed by a shell company with ties to the original development contractor. While I was building my legal fortress, Sophia was launching her own offensive that would have made General Patton proud. She filed noise complaints when my rooster crowed at dawn. Apparently 6 in the morning was too early for wealthy people to wake up. She reported my chicken coop to code enforcement as an agricultural violation in a residential zone. She even had the nerve to call the health department about unsanitary conditions because I composted my kitchen scraps. Every day brought a new certified letter, a new violation, notice, a new threat. The woman was throwing everything she had at me, hoping something would stick, long enough to make me give up and sell out. But here's what Sophia didn't understand about dealing with old construction guys. We're like cockroaches, hard to kill and impossible to intimidate. Every harassment letter she sent just made me more determined to see this through to the bitter end. Betty Harris became my unofficial intelligence officer, keeping track of which board members were visiting Sophia's house for emergency meetings and reporting back on the increasingly frantic phone calls she could hear through the walls. The desperation was becoming obvious. These people had built their dream homes partially on stolen land, and now they were facing a nightmare that could cost them everything. The community was starting to take notice of our 3-week surveying project and all the drama surrounding it. Betty had been quietly spreading the word about what Jake's measurements revealed, and the reactions were as divided as you'd expect in a neighborhood where property values determine social status. Some of the longtime residents who remembered the construction phase were nodding their heads, saying they always wondered about those boundary adjustments. But the newer residents, especially those friendly with the HOA board, were closing ranks and treating me like I was some kind of senile old man having delusions about property ownership. Jake's additional research into the development company that built these mansions revealed a pattern that made my skin crawl. They'd used similar tactics in 3 other developments across the state, filing fraudulent surveys, moving boundary markers during construction, then creating HOA agreements that made the illegal land grabs look legitimate. In each case, they'd targeted elderly property owners who were less likely to fight expensive legal battles, eventually buying them out for below-market prices after years of harassment. I wasn't their first victim. I was just their first victim who happened to be a professional surveyor with 45 years of experience reading property maps. Sophia's desperation reached new heights when she showed up at my door with a cashier's check for $50,000, offering